still seeing you.
Yeah.
Here, once you put up a PowerPoint, the screen is big with the PowerPoint, but you are only very small in the bottom.
And your people disappear.
Well, yeah. And so there's no interaction going on around the other people. So the more you can try to engage people by bringing them in through questions, discussion and whatever, I personally think is where online needs to go. That's the challenge, is to get participation.
Yes. Excellent. In view of which, John, could you fire that question out at the beginning, asking people what they think the uncomfortable truths are and letting them know it's anonymous? Because I think that would get a lot of dialogue going, wouldn't it?
So, Howard, we met very briefly yesterday.
Yeah.
And I think what we want to do is have a fairly, elephant in the room kind of conversation.
Robust.
Robust, and
yep.
And I think we would like to do, and either me or you, I'm happy either way, is to really try and get, I think we need to warm people up a little bit so they get used to using the chat pane. So tell us where you're from, a little bit what organisation you're from and so on, get them using it all, and so on, and ask them to maybe close every other browser down and really be present with us in this session, sort of thing. And then we're going to share some things, but also we really would like to hear some of the uncomfortable truths. It can be done anonymous through the Q&A button rather than the chat pane. The chat pane's obviously, you can see who posts. But what we really want to do is to get, let out the herd of elephants into the room. I don't think we need to be negative either. I think partly, what are we really good? What are we really struggling with as an industry? But also, what are we also very good at? Also, I think we need to leave. At least make sure that people share also later on in the session. What are we really good at? What are our strengths? So it's not a complete beating up session, because I think that can get quite negative, and we're not here to do that, I don't think.
Sure, John, I think the other observation is the industry is responding to some of the challenges, but we were surprised yesterday at how sort of very early stages they are. So the Construction Excellence has now got these groups working on quality, working on well-being, but they were formed pretty much early this year, and so it's a journey. It started. It's not that it's a surprise, but obviously the oil and gas industry has had some bitter lessons, and that's what we wanted to talk a little bit about.
Yes, one of the things I mean, John's used the elephant in the room. One of the things that I suspect, and I've seen it from a psychological perspective over the years. I've forgotten his name, but some years ago, a chap put forward what he calls hippos rather than elephants. Have you heard this? Have you heard what a hippo is? It's the highest paid person's opinion, and that's what happens. So, in other words, if the hippo is in the room is the highest paid person, everyone will particularly follow that, and they won't necessarily want to disagree because that's the the hierarchical structure that people still have in their mind.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, Howard, the uncomfortable truth could be, I can't be honest.
Exactly.
No, yeah, and that's the uncomfortable truth. I feel retribution if I'm totally honest, therefore I won't say anything.
Yeah, but I don't know how many hippos we might have in the room today, but they have to be offended to change their behaviours.
Okay.
But I think you're right, John. I think, as we've discussed multiple times, construction faces incredible opportunities, and particularly coming out of the pandemic, with the determination, not just in the UK, but internationally, for governments to invest. And it's the only way we're going to get out of this mess that we're in. But therein are some challenges, but it's incredible opportunities as well.
Yeah. So just practically, because in literally a couple of minutes, we'll go live. Howard, also Andrew Carpenter, who's our sort of client, is he joining us today? Do you know, Howard? You're muted, Howard, at the moment.
I'll have to look. I was just going to look. I haven't heard from him that he isn't, but let me just check, because he's normally in by now.
I think Howard, what you can do is set the scene a little bit for who we've got is our main guest is Peter.
I was going to leave that to you this time, John, because no, I actually think it would be a two-hander here, John. So if you want to start to introduce people and get it going, you're great at the chat pane because you're quicker at typing than me. So I wonder if I then take over to host the questions, or we share them between us. What do you think?
Yeah, no, let's do that.
And you'll have to do the poll at the beginning. So I'll quite happily introduce it.
What poll is that?
Well, have you got a poll? Well, you've got. Is it a slide? Is it?
No, we've got. Well, I don't know whether Pete's got any slides.
No slides.
We're not gonna go with slides now, are we? Is that the idea? Or okay.
So we've got nothing to, because I thought he said he had something to sort of get people to tease things out.
What we want is people
show of hands
to raise questions as they're sort of going on, or to raise what they think the uncomfortable truths are. So as Pete's talking, if people can say, oh, I agree, or what about this, or that, and then Paul and I will pick up on those to see if there's anything that has a parallel in the oil and gas world. So,
well, we can use the Q&A, but we can also use a raise hand. So if you want to ask people, you know, what the view is, and we get 40 raised hands and there's 60 in the room, you know, that gives you a percentile, if you like, or whatever, or a mark of agreement or disagreement. Do you want to use raised hands?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think also in the introduction, whether I do it or Paul or Bruce does it, I think I would like to say this is an uncomfortable position to put myself in, because I'm telling people about some very personal issues that were painful to go through. And I'm doing that with the objective of helping. And I may have a partial understanding, but I'm giving my partial understanding, and would hope that others would be willing to do the same.
Okay, well, I'll introduce it as a conversation that really matters, and I'll hand over to you to say that, because I think it's better coming from you. If you say, you know, because if I say it, I'm almost making an excuse for you, really. Whereas if you say it, is, and I'm all for putting the uncomfortable truths on the table. And I will raise the hippo question, if you like, as to how many people actually experience that. Because I observe it I've observed it over the years too often.
Yeah.
You know, outside the room, people say lots of things. Inside the room, they say nothing.
In fact, when I take workshops, I can actually ask people individually, what's it like to work in this company? And they go, it's great. Get them together. What's it like to work here? It's terrible.
Oh, I know.
Because groupthink. And groupthink is so powerful. It's so powerful.
Yeah. Okay, well, John, we're a couple of minutes to go. How many are we expecting today?
I think there's about 40 something, wasn't there? On
yeah.
That thing I saw. So which is a good number. But I think more importantly is that we're having the conversation. We're capturing it all. I think it's something. So we're not going to use slides at all. I mean, we could put up that first slide which shows what the actual event is. I think when people first arrive and they're just a whole sea of faces, they might just think, what's all this about?
Yeah.
It might be just worth sharing your screen, Pete, because it will make us a little bit smaller and it'll make that screen bigger, but we'll turn it off quite quickly, if that's okay.
And it'd probably be best that people see your face, that we introduce you at the front end so people are comfortable.
Yeah.
So the best way to do that is to show the screen at the beginning while I do a bit of talk. A lot of people might have seen me before introducing it. Then that comes down, John, and then you introduce each other, the three of you. So, and that's done on the big screen so that people can actually see you and get comfortable for a minute with your face.
Just use a different presentation, that's all. Or is this the one, actually? You're muted, Pete. Oh, there we go. That's better. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, I'll put us on air then, so we'll be on from now on.
Great.
Howard, you will just welcome people as they arrive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see that Andrew has signed in. Do you want to bring him in, John? Good morning to those who are just arriving. We're just coming up to midday. We'll wait for people to sign in before we start.
Morning, Howard.
Good morning. Would you like? Oh, there's a shirt for the day.
Yeah. It is Friday.
You should have worn that one when you came along to the Gay Pride event. You realise that? So it's almost one of their flags now, isn't it?
I know. I don't
Yeah,
know.
we're all dying to see it now. We're dying to see it.
It's a tradition, Paul, on a Friday.
I see. In fact, one company I've did some work for recently, because they're such a young company, they have dress up Friday.
Oh right, yeah.
So the reverse, they come in dicky bow ties on and long dresses.
Oh gosh, superb! That's right up my street. That is.
Yeah, I did suggest, yes.
So who's actually doing the presentation today?
Well, we've got a bit of a panel. Essentially, it is led by Peter McAteer,
Yeah.
but we're going to have rather some uncomfortable conversations, we hope, today by trying to get, yeah, I'm sure you'll be pitching into this. So we want to try and get some uncomfortable truths out about the construction sector using the oil and gas experience, something to learn from.
Okay.
So we've got a wise panel of three wise men.
Okay. That's Paul, Bruce, and Peter, is it?
Yep.
Those two and Paul.
I always like to say I've got Peter and Paul, and I'm waiting for Mary to join.
Now you're showing your age.
That
now
takes you back, that one, yeah.
I was going to say, got to be careful of that one.
I've got the dress ready. Don't worry.
That's not a thought I want to have in my mind.
How many are we expecting? Howard?
Well, we'll go 40. But when I looked earlier this morning, it was 42 that were registered.
Okay, so there's still a few more due in, then, isn't there?
Yeah, I think give another minute. I think.
Can you tell how many have joined now, Howard, already? Can you tell?
Yes.
Yeah, there's 17 other than us, so there's 23 all up. Yeah. We do find people join, but then unfortunately people leave. The one thing about online is that it's easy for people to walk out the room. It's not quite so noticeable.
It's depressing for the person who's speaking, though.
Oh, I know, but that's when they don't come back if you have an interval. That's why you never have an interval as a speaker.
Yes.
I think we ought to make a start.
Yeah, over to you then, Andrew.
Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the latest in our run of webinars brought to you by Constructing Excellence in the Southwest, in Wales, in the Midlands, and now also in the Northeast. And we're joined by the Housing Forum and the Structural Timber Association in providing these education webinars for you on a Tuesday and a Friday at midday. We've been covering a lot of topics since the middle of March. Time flies. Today, I'm really looking forward to the next hour. Howard has lined up a series of speakers led by Peter McAteer, but also joined by Paul and Bruce. And we're going to be looking at the uncomfortable truths for the construction industry and using some best practice case studies from the oil and gas industries to, if you like, benchmark what's happened there versus what we're doing at the moment. So in terms of dealing with a crisis, I don't think there can be much of a bigger crisis than what we're going through at the moment, COVID-19. And how we come out of this as an industry is going to be incredibly important. And everyone I speak to is of the view that we don't want business as usual. We want to find a new norm. So I'm hoping and I'm sure that the discussion in the next 60 minutes will help Constructing Excellence and other organisations determine how we should go about that. So without further ado, I'll hand back to Howard to go through the house rules as is normal. And then I look forward to Peter, Paul and Bruce. Thank you.
Hi, good morning again to everyone, or good afternoon. Just three things. We're going to have as much discussion going today as possible. So if you would like to perhaps introduce yourself initially through the chat pane, that will enable all of us to see who's in the room. It'd just be interesting to see where your name, where you come from, and even what you're interested in getting out of today. So if you want to start using the chat pane, please do. You'll find that on your Zoom menu bar. The other thing you'll find on your menu bar, which will be really interesting, is the Q&A menu. Please do ask the questions, because this is going to be a session which is all about Q&A and involvement. If you want to own your question, I'm going to be very happy to bring you in so that you can ask it live. But if you wanted to ask anonymously, I will make sure it gets put to the panel. And during it, I suspect we may be asking people's opinions or views, like a yes or a no kind of answer. So we probably will be using the hands up function that you'll see. So many thanks for that. Any problems, please do come to us in the chat pane, and let's enjoy. So I'm now going to hand over to Peter, who will introduce the others, and we'll get going. Looking forward to this. Many thanks. Over to you, Peter.
Hi there. I'll just get rid of the sharing of the screen, and I will start this by saying that it's not just uncomfortable truths about the construction sector. This is actually very uncomfortable for me, because I'm going to be sharing with you some very personal experiences that were very painful. And very few of us invest in anything more important than our own homes. Well, I've done that on 5 occasions. I've purchased 5 new homes in different regions of the UK. I've had 2 that were life-threatening. Twice took a builder through legal process, took a builder and the NHBC through the financial ombudsman. Cost me 8 years of my life, and I ended up not being able to sell a particular house because it was unsafe, despite revealing those problems within the first 2 months of moving in. So these are really, really painful experiences, I'm sure you can imagine. And the financial implications of it were really quite extraordinary. And I don't put a number to it, but let's say it was not that far away from the cost of the building itself. Because I'd tried to move at that time, it already started the purchase process of another building and couldn't sell the one that I already had. So the reason I say that it's an uncomfortable thing for me to present to you is I've got a partial understanding of construction. I've been talking to the industry now for close to a year, and I can see some things that resonate with me given my own personal experiences. And those of you that read the little flyer that came with this, at a very tender age, I was 25 miles away from Piper Alpha, the night that 167 people lost their lives, and I was heavily involved in the processes that took place thereafter, particularly on the subject of the competency and compliance management issues that we were facing as an industry. And subsequent to that, I was involved in the Macondo disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, which was minutes away from the world's largest ever collapse of a company, which would have taken down 20% of UK and USA pensions, a little known fact. So the uncomfortable part of this for me was watching another industry deal with safety critical issues in an incredibly poor way. It was my personal experience. And what I saw was that the industry was facing a number of challenges that were familiar to me. So I will just describe what I perceive to be the major challenges in construction, and that is we've got what looks like a perfect storm. We've got an aging workforce. I understand circa 80% of the workforce is over the age of 50 in a physical environment and a demanding one. We've got fast growth expected, £5 billion worth of investment announced this week with the Prime Minister and many others to come, I'm sure. Low margins and highly cyclical business, that's very familiar territory to me. And a poor safety track record, which is actually sadly also familiar to me in the historical past, but thankfully not anymore. The intriguing aspect of 97% of construction companies comprising less than 300 employees presents enormous challenges. It leads to incredible silos of data. silos of compliance and complex supply chains with organisations that are poorly equipped to deal with that, which is less familiar to me. And we're accustomed to dealing with much larger organisations and much more capable organisations, I would suggest. But we do have this sort of siloed supply chain in construction, I believe, and I don't see a system of knowledge. I find lots and lots of minutiae of repositories that don't talk to each other, that lead to complexity and cause inefficiency, it would appear. So going back to my personal experiences and looking at my housing experience, I did mention in the introduction that I ended up referring the experience to the Grenfell disaster inquiry. And it was because of my involvement in Piper Alpha and the Macondo disaster that I could see systemic failures. And those systemic failures were the lack of an independent check on building standards compliance throughout the food chain, the lack of competency of people throughout the delivery, unclear safety standards. I had to explain to 4 gas engineers what the risk assessment process should be for gas safety in my own home. I found that incredible, and they had no idea that they had certain standards to apply to, and they were openly asking me for guidance how to do their job, which I found astounding. No evidence of compliance at all. I was trying to find out where the checks and balances had been from the architect through the design acceptance into the commencement of construction, through the commencement of construction and the commissioning of that building for safe entry. No evidence whatsoever was apparent throughout that entire food chain. And there was a blame culture. Everybody ran away. I had a director of the building run out of my house when I challenged him on these kind of integrity issues. So that failure to accept responsibility and blaming everybody else, I found out that the gas fire, for instance, that was installed had ceased production 3 years before the building was constructed, and it was not possible to get parts for it. Led me to another conclusion, that low margins lead to cutting corners. And overall, over 8 years of dealing with these organisations, and more probably considering other buildings that I was involved in, just chaos, frankly. It just looked appalling. And that's what I'd like to open up the discussion for. Painful truths for me, difficult truths. I'm telling you something that I hope causes conversation, because I don't know the answers to everything. I've seen solutions delivered in the oil and gas sector to these things. We've been heavily involved in those, and we're trying to offer those to the construction sector. They might help, but these are just thoughts and ideas. And at this point, I'd like to invite Bruce and Paul to chip in and get a conversation going, if that's okay.
You go first, Bruce.
Thanks, Pete. My name's Bruce Webb. I've spent 25 years in the oil and gas industry, and one of my roles was an area manager in Angola, where we were working in deep water. And it was at the same time as the Deepwater Horizon incident in the Gulf of Mexico, and I was working for BP. And we did have a drilling rig running with a company called Transocean, which was the same company that was involved in the incident that Pete referred to, where 11 people were killed, and it was the largest environmental disaster in the history of the industry. Now, I was responsible for 120 people working offshore, but also we had a drilling rig. And the question that I had to go to bed at night with is, how do you know that people are competent? How do you know that you're not going to have another incident? At the same time, I was living in a house quite away from the city and would travel every morning to go to work in a minibus. And the reflection was that if we had to get up at 4 in the morning because traffic was so bad and dangerous. If I was killed in that minibus, it would be tragic and would have made local news, maybe. But if I went offshore and was killed in a fire, an oil and gas explosion, it would be global news and would have ended BP. It would have sunk the company. And yet I'm still dead. My family's still at a loss, but because the context is different. And so one of the things I wonder for your industry in a post-Grenfell world is there a transition? Is there a heightened social sense on the impact, particularly when it's not just workers and inside, but when you've got members of the public involved? So how do you know, and how do you go to sleep at night? So a few years later, I found myself vice president of operations of another oil and gas company with operations in the UK, Germany, Norway, and again with drilling engineers, and working with Pete on some of the tools that he's been developing over the years, allowed me to get a picture of each of the drilling engineers, each of the engineers, each of the supervisors, what their strengths, competencies were, and then map that to see that I had a gap in one place and move people around. So it's something I'm passionate about. It's something that has actually helped. It's had real application. But my perspective, which is the voice of the client, is really, how do you know at night when you go to bed? So looking forward to a good conversation. Happy to bring some anecdotes and stories, and I'll hand over to Paul.
Thanks, Bruce. Right, I'll be quite quick. The first thing is I have a confession to make. I am a consultant, and I specialize in individual behavior, team dynamics, organizational and company cultures, and collaborative working. So that's what I've been specializing in for the last 40 years, and I'm getting rather tired. And probably when I've said that, there's probably people now already switching off, thinking, oh no, people issues again, we'd had this before. And from where I sit, they're the most important things. I actually did a workshop a few years ago for the ECITB, the Engineering Construction Industry Training Board. Did a couple of workshops, and that's the only insight I have into the construction industry. And I would say the two workshops, people were quite negative compared with other industries I've worked with. Whether they just didn't like me or whether they didn't like me being there, but they were fairly negative. And as a behavioralist, I was actually intrigued when I was asked to take part in this. That I love the title, Uncomfortable Truths About the Construction Industry. Sort of confront your devils. And I was wondering how truthful you really can be. I do lots of workshops and people hold back all the time what they really think until the last 5 minutes of a one-day workshop. Then it suddenly comes out, or in the bar afterwards over a few beers. The truth really comes out. And it's difficult in this day and age to be completely truthful. So my contention to you is possibly, and I don't know because I don't know your industry that well, the uncomfortable truth could be that the construction industry actually has an inappropriate culture, inappropriate way of acting, behaving, and thinking. It's a possibility. But if I had to take a few the things I work on, I mean, is the industry, is it aggressive or considerate? Is it results driven or people focused? Is it a closed culture, an open culture? Is it siloed or collaborative? I don't know, only you know. Now, if it's aggressive, results driven, closed and siloed, you'll have different behaviors than if it's actually considerate, people focused, open and collaborative. And you'll have and that will actually drive the way people act and behave within the industry. I can't tell, but the one thing is certain, the culture that you think you haven't got. And the more senior people think the culture is better than it actually is. It's called the espoused culture, the culture that people say, that's the culture we've got. It's really results driven. It could be an uncomfortable truth that some people like working in a macho, unsafe industry that gives them kudos in the pub. And that's just one of the things. Be careful. So the culture you think you have, I doubt you actually have. So understanding your culture and how it's affecting people's behavior is actually pivotal if you're considering what the untruths are. So that's all I'm going to say.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, I've got a question to lob in and get going on this. 20 years ago or so, a report came out, the Egan report, which was entitled Never Waste a Good Crisis. 20 years on, the construction industry probably hasn't changed significantly. But if it wasn't for the disasters, would the oil and gas industry have actually changed? Was there a culture and a willingness to embrace this, or was it the actual crisis, the real crisis, that changed things?
Well, I'll make a start and then let Pete jump in. There have been, through the process industries, very, very famous disasters, Bhopal, 3 Mile Island, Flitsborough, etc. And there has been change. For the oil and gas industry, Piper Alpha, Pete mentioned at the beginning, Lord Cullen wrote a report called the Cullen Report, and that made very specific recommendations. So I worked on a major, multi-billion-dollar project, construction project straight after that. It's called ETAP, Eastern Trough Area Project, built in Wallsend Shipyard and Methil in Fife. And it was the first bridge-linked platform that separated where people slept from where the hazardous area was. It was more expensive, but it was a recommendation of the Cullen Report. So would the consortium, which was BP, Shell and Total, build a bridge-linked platform without the Cullen Report? I doubt it. But did many people like Pete, who was so close to it, have a visceral sense of trying to do something differently? Absolutely. And I think it takes both. It's legislation, but also leadership intent. And there's a lot of questions now on the anniversary of Piper Alpha of what really has changed. And yes, there are bridge link platforms all over the place. There's maintenance really changed. So I think it's continual, and I think it's a mixture of both legislation and a call to action that people take up. That's my view. I wonder what.
Can I just add to that, Bruce? I think one of the things in talking to the, I can't say who it is. It's a long time ago. The head of the health and safety for the UK told me over lunch one day. He said, "Kill people individually, you have no problem. Kill people together, you have a disaster." He said, and at the time, it was the time the Clapham Junction showed up, Clapham Junction. He said, "We killed recently 20 people at Clapham Junction. It's a disaster. We killed more people on the roads in that same day, and nobody cared less." So if you kill people together, it's a disaster which people take notice of. Kill people individually, and I suspect the construction industry is killing people individually. There's no disaster.
Paul, do you know where that comes from? That comes from the mining industry. And there is a reason that only 8 people are allowed in a tunnel at a given time. And that's because anything over 8 people is defined as a disaster. So it originates actually from the mining industry, where we used to have incredible disasters in this nation. And going back to that question, Howard, would we have changed? Categorically not. I was deeply shocked when I moved from the mining industry into the oil industry, and the National Coal Board in the UK that I worked for was way ahead of the game. We were probably the leading organisation in the world in mining. We'd had the Loughborough disaster, we'd had numerous explosions going way back over the previous 100 years. We'd killed an awful lot of people. And we became adept and really good at training, developing, ensuring competency, having all the benchmarking capabilities, brilliant at managing explosion. And unfortunately, that industry is no more. But when I walked into the oil industry, I felt like I was going back in time. I thought I was going back 50 years. There were people manhandling equipment that in the mining industry was fully automated. And I'm talking about being able to operate a 200-meter wide coal face from 1,000 meters underground and 5 kilometers away in 1979. So technology was massively ahead of the oil industry, and we're only just getting to that point. And this, I find, is an interesting thought. It took probably 10 years for the industry to take seriously the regulations that came out of the Piper Alpha disaster. I was astounded how slow we were. And yet it was fairly simple, just like the findings of the Grenfell disaster. And I'm not a person with a huge amount of spare time for reading reams and reams of investigations into disasters, but the kernel of it is pretty simple. It's likely it's going to take the construction industry a good 10 years to get its head around this. And a similar parallel, another 10 years, it's 10 years since the Gulf of Mexico disaster. It only became a statutory obligation to deal with competency and compliance management type issues in November last year. Absolutely appalling. that such a major, colossal disaster took so long to come to fruition, to become adopted in best practice. So it is interesting. I've drawn 3 parallels there from different sectors, but there are continua out there that we can lean on, that we can learn from, that we can accelerate the way in which we behave, that Paul talked about, the way in which we operate. There are best practices to lean upon. There are systems and capabilities out there that we can leverage.
Okay, I just want to correct myself. I said the report about the crisis was Egan. In fact, Egan, interestingly, produced the original report that was 10 years later followed up by Never Wasting a Good Crisis with the Wolstenholme report. So 10 years further on. So you're talking about a 10-year cycle to take it on. We're now perhaps 20 years on and still haven't adopted it. So I've got a question that's come in, anonymous. Is one problem for construction that organisations will often employ external businesses to manage, advise on health and safety, and B, senior managers, owners will often not embrace and lead, effectively negating any responsibility for a health and safety culture?
I would like to chip in a piece of evidence that my son gave me on this subject only a few weeks ago. And this was in the railway sector. The CEO walking down the supply chain as trains were being constructed, almost hand in hand with a fellow director during COVID-19, whilst they were trying to get best practices in place. This was to find itself on social media with a bunch of photos saying this is the kind of leadership we've got, which is a little bit laughable, but I do think that there is a tendency sometimes to just bring somebody in, hoping that they'll put a sticking plaster on the organisation. What we believe is actually it's better to envelop these approaches within the organisation itself and to build systems within the organisation as it stands, reflecting the means by which they already communicate. If you try to just bring something in, what you end up with is a document on a shelf, a blip in behaviour, and no fundamental change. What needs to happen is that the organisation embraces that change, and it's almost like a groundswell upwards. If it's meaningless to the guy with the tools in their hands, it won't work, because all it is an aspiration from leadership with no real heart and soul to it.
Okay, I'm going to put a question now to people to try and get an uncomfortable truth on the table here. So my question, and this is all anonymous, only I will see the names. So I'm not interested in the names, I'm just interested in seeing the hands. So show of hands here, is leadership in the construction sector an uncomfortable truth that the sector needs to recognise and has not acknowledged that it's something that it needs to do something about? So is actually the leadership in the construction sector an uncomfortable truth? So let's have a show of hands if people think it is one of the uncomfortable truths that needs to be addressed. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's not, it's about 40% of people who think that is a truth. So I suppose the question is, was leadership an issue in the oil and gas sector that was never put on the table, an uncomfortable truth?
Oh, certainly. It became an expectation. So as a former executive in the oil and gas industry, I would not have been able to move or be promoted or appointed without starting every conversation with safety and safety as a priority. Now, if some people were paying lip service to that or not, but it certainly was recognized as being a culture. And so one of the if we're in the world of uncomfortable truths, is I'm looking at the Constructing Excellence website for the Southwest and the other Constructing Excellence website, and I see client groups, procurement, smart, innovation, sustainability, quality, and health, well-being, but I don't see safety anywhere. And then I go and look at health and well-being, and it's the health of employees, but it doesn't smack safety first. And the oil industry, you had to move to literally saying safety first. Now, there are a lot of psychologists and people that say, well, actually, that is not the best way to best performance. But to answer your question directly, the latest thinking on safety performance is that leadership is absolutely critical. It's the center of the 4 dimensions around cost and schedule and performance. So I think it's vital.
To add to that, Bruce, I think the important thing, I love the statistic about the 11 people put their hands up. It just proves to me that probably 60% of the people are actually managers themselves. And they think it's okay. The other thing I would say is
not facing the uncomfortable truth is what you're suggesting. No. We'll perhaps ask them again to see whether they're now prepared to. Yes, well, okay.
the other thing is in behaviour, if your manager demonstrates that they care about something, you care about it too. So if your manager walks the job, asks you about safety, does safety reviews, has safety panels, if they care about safety, you care about it too. So that's the only thing. If the person just abdicates responsibility completely and says, that's up to somebody else, and I'm now walking away, that's actually complete abdication. And the more junior people then say, well, he doesn't care about it, I won't care either.
And I think this may be the second part of the question we had put is senior managers, owners will not embrace and lead, effectively negating any responsibilities. That's why, you know, I asked the question. And it's interesting that, you know, in the oil and gas industry, you start from health and safety. I mean, one of the persons put here is maybe a low figure, is you've engaged a very engaged group here at CE. It's true. Often you only engage the people who are interested. But let's have some more questions, please. I mean, you know, I'm interested, is part of the issue a demographic that we have leaders at the top of organizations, been around a long time. They're not the people fit for purpose to take the industry forward into a new world.
Howard, if I might, you just said something that sparked a thought with me. You said that the oil and gas industry was safety-led or health and safety-led. I would dispute that, actually. We've been through probably some of the most tortuous business cycles that any industry has seen. And I'm in my 4th collapse in the oil price. And I can tell you that survival has been extremely tough in any of those situations. And one fundamental that I've really picked up on is an efficient operation is a safe one. And by adhering to best practice, by putting it in the hands of the person at the point of delivery, there are incredible efficiencies that come out of that. And given the way that modern technology works, we can do this enterprise-wide, and we have deep dive capability that gives visibility from the CEO to the guy with the tools in his hands as to what the implications of that best practice are, which drive efficiency. And the best way I can explain this is we were supported by 10 oil companies to build an online simulator that takes a past event, places the guy in the situation, as it unfolds, pauses and asks them, is it okay, shall we continue type questions, all the time scoring them, and then has multiple choice questions in there so that we can get a deep understanding of what the capabilities of this person are in that situation at the point of delivery. And that was put together as a result of the Gulf of Mexico disaster. But I was sat on an aircraft talking to a guy sat next to me on my way from Aberdeen to Manchester one time. And he said, what do you do? And I explained this thing we were building. And I said, what do you do? He said, oh, I'm an HSE inspector. He said, would you come and present that to me? I said, why? It's all about efficiency. He said, no, we believe an efficient operation is a safe one. And we've been back to present to the Health and Safety Executive a number of times on these and other similar subjects. But so therefore, I would say to you quite the reverse, actually. It's not about the oil industry being driven by health and safety. It's a necessity to behave in those ways. But the best way of doing it is by being more efficient and being slicker, neater, better at how we deliver these things.
Thanks. I'm going to ask, Paul has made a comment in the chat pane, and I'm going to ask Paul if he'd be happy to enter and to bring that up at the panel. So please raise your hand if you're happy to do that, Paul, and I'll bring you in. Paul Morgan. Great. I'll just bring you in.
I love that question, Paul. And do you know, I've sat on the receiving end and on the client end of those kind of situations, and I've got one live right now with a particularly large company. And yes, clients are always focused on price and program rather than all in value. And what I would say, it's incumbent upon the supplier to demonstrate best value and the impact of value. Because if you can't articulate that in a meaningful fashion, then you as a supplier are failing. And I know that's really challenging, but I've been successful as a supplier in doing this on a number of occasions. And we're in some quite challenging situations as well by taking the full cycle view. This is where it becomes really critical. It's taking a risk-based full cycle view, and one of the systems that actually Bruce and I have deployed on a number of occasions is risk-based full value cost and quality evaluation to make best value for the entirety decisions, and replaying to the client your composite part of that is your value add. It's your responsibility, I would suggest, to demonstrate that. And that's how you get over those kind of hurdles, because everybody's cost driven, everybody's schedule driven. We're all busy people trying to make a living at the end of the day, but it doesn't remove the responsibility from the supplier. However, the education process for teaching clients to understand this is not an easy one, but it can be done. And the tools that you use to do that, I'd be happy to discuss with you, but it can be done, and it's been done multiple times.
Thanks. I've got Paul ready to come in, but just for that, Andrew's got his hand up. Would you like to add anything, Andrew, before I ask Paul?
Yeah, just let me, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'm sure everyone else can.
Good.
Yep.
No, what I wanted to say was that the comments you're making about health and safety figures being more positive for those companies that adopt these good principles. Constructing Excellence has been responsible for the industry KPIs for the last 20 plus years. And in each case, the performance of the business, if using, in our terms, what we call CE principles, has been improved, not only in productivity and profitability, but also health and safety, staff retention, sustainability, and so on. Can I share a slide or not? Is that possible?
Yep, John, if you're there, can you open up Andrew's screen sharing capability?
I want to put a slide on the screen which shows the KPIs that CE have been collecting for a number of years, over 20 years, just to show you what I mean, if that's possible.
Yeah, that's fine, Andrew.
Can you see that now?
We can. You might make it
yeah,
make it a bit bigger.
Yeah. Is that okay?
No, it's gone black at the moment for me.
Oh, has it?
Yeah.
Oh, right. I can see it on my screen. You see, I can see it.
Raise of hands. Can other people see it? Let me know, please. If other people can see it. Can anyone else see it?
Not yet, no.
No, don't think so.
Okay, I don't know what's happened there then.
Download it and start again.
Andrew, if you hit escape, it will take away the presentation view, and we could see the slide before then.
Then can you
Yeah.
see that?
Yes, we can see the main slide. Yeah.
Okay. So the point I'm making, these are the results of the Constructing Excellence KPIs. I can't remember the year, but to be honest with you, every year it's pretty much the same. If you take that 100% straight line as the general performance of the UK construction industry, you then look at the bar chart, and that's the performance of either projects or companies that have adopted, if you like, Egan principles of collaborative working and integrated supply chains. So you can see in every situation, client satisfaction, defects, etc., how much better the industry performs. You'll also notice that health and safety is significantly improved, but it also includes things like profitability and productivity. So the point you were making, that they're all aligned, is actually proven over 20 years worth of information that we've gathered within Constructing Excellence. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
That's great to see, Andrew. What proportion of the industry does this slide represent, do you think?
Relatively small, unfortunately. We've been at this game for, well, I've been at it for nearly probably 25 years, and we've scratched the surface. If I said 10%, I think I'd probably be exaggerating.
So how do we get to the 90%?
If I knew that, I'd be a rich man. We've been trying. We're hopeful that the COVID-19 could be the catalyst to allow us to do that, because we've got all the information at our fingertips. We've got 20 plus years of information, like I've just shown you, that proves the case. But we come back to that culture and behaviours discussion that we had right at the beginning. We know what to do. We know why we've got to do it. What we've struggled with is the how. And what I'm seeing currently post-COVID is the most united construction industry I've ever seen. We've got a construction industry council and a construction leadership council that have come together, and it's the most joined up I've ever seen us. And we're really in the government eye now because of what they've seen that we can do with the Nightingale hospitals. So what they're saying, well, if you can behave that way to build a hospital, why the hell can't you do that with everything else you do? So, you know, there's a responsibility and an opportunity for us to take that learning and what I say JFDI, which you know what that stands for. Yeah. So I'm an optimist, and I think this is the moment, to quote a song from Jekyll and Hyde.
I really like those thoughts, Andrew. And by example, I'm looking for pilot projects to do the how, to see if there are companies out there, organizations out there willing to trial the kind of thing that we've done in the past to see if it works. And I'll give you a really hot example. We took our systems into PepsiCo, into their crisp factories, which were under great strain during COVID-19. They had 40% absenteeism, and we reduced their time to compliance for trained, safe and capable for new recruits in an extremely dynamic situation within 3 weeks. We took 270 people through a training program, got them trained, safe and capable in a time period of 2 weeks, whereas their norm was 10 weeks. And this was a shocking revelation to them, so much so that they've extended their pilot from the UK to North and South America during COVID-19. And we've taken the construction excellence safe return to work data and placed it in the same environment. We're just looking for people to test it, try it, see if it works. It is available on any device. So we're looking for that kind of opportunity to just see if we're right. And I'd welcome
the frustration, Peter, that we have is that we can go back, some of us, as I say, 2 decades. And, you know, in the early days, we were doing case studies with people like Premier Inn, where it would take 62 weeks to build a Premier in hotel, and that was reduced by half through using collaborative cultures and integrated supply chains.
Yeah.
And then you show slides that I've just shown, and for the life of me, I can't believe why companies don't buy into it. I mean, if your finance director sees that slide, why wouldn't he or she? But we haven't bought into it as a sector.
Andrew, do various companies on one site, do they collaborate together quite well? The cultures are very similar, are they?
It depends on the leadership. And
Yes.
It depends on the contract. So if the client picks an adversarial type contract,
yes,
where there's everything at every stage,
the culture becomes a conflict culture.
Yes. So
yes.
really, the procurement method dictates the culture and behaviour.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
I can draw on similar parallels, Andrew. In the oil industry, we had an influx of new procurement strategies in the late 90s, which was all about push it out to the contractors, make them responsible. They were under the names of things like integrated services, where organizations were responsible for delivery and production. And we became incredibly efficient. And then new leadership took place within the clients, and the whole gambit changed again. And we've taken many years to get back to where we were in some sense. So I can see that. And what I see in organizations is cyclic behaviors, where new leadership comes in and the first thing they want to do is change. And my own thoughts would be pause, learn, listen, and then look for opportunities for improvement. But what tends to happen is new leadership comes in, makes a radical change, and that then cascades down throughout the organisation, and there's a forgetting curve that takes place, and performance goes out the window quite often. And I wonder if you've got a similar situation.
I wish I knew.
Yeah.
I'm keeping going for a bit more because I'm an optimist. So there's a few more years left in me yet.
Yeah. No, I think the opportunities are incredible in construction.
They are massive. And you know, Boris has said, hasn't he, this week, we're going to build our way out of this situation. So once again, we're absolutely in the spotlight.
Yes.
This is the opportunity.
And it's about bringing new people in. It's about bringing young people in, exciting them about the opportunities, giving them the belief that there is actually a stable platform here for the longevity, and that there are opportunities in various parts of construction, which it looks to me that that's another fundamental problem that I can see, is that people go in and they think, oh, I'm in rail, that's it. Or I'm in nuclear, or I'm in airports or buildings. The fundamental skill sets that take place within these individual silos are very, very transportable. And, you know, it's about understanding cement, metallurgy, construction, structures, these kind of things. And the lack of recognition of the silo potential and the inability to leverage skills and to break down those silos such that we can transport people, transform them, develop them without having to completely re-educate them, because that's not necessary. It's just identifying those little parts of what I call the piano keyboard of skill sets that they're lacking, that we can fine-tune them on, rather than reinventing a new penny whistle and coming out with a single tune again.
I think the one thing to our advantage at the moment, as I said earlier, is that for the first time in my 40 plus years in construction, I'm seeing a totally joined up industry with a straight line through to government and a very short straight line through the Construction Leadership Council. Everyone seems to be singing off the same hymn sheet. We seem to have the same list of priorities: achieving net zero, improving quality, using modern methods of construction, etc. And that seems to be consistent throughout the industry. So if ever there was a chance to improve what we do and how we do it, this is it. If we miss this opportunity, I'm not sure where we go, to be honest. And the other thing, of course, we have got coming up is, and you mentioned earlier about exciting young people, is around digitalization, because that's the way the industry is going under the heading of smart construction, which combines off-site technologies and digital technologies. And that's where, you know, the younger generation are, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I would suggest we bring Bruce in on that, because Bruce has spent his entire career in off-site construction, and there again is another example of how we can leverage experience that's already there.
Andrew, it's a huge topic. I was in a call with a startup company yesterday talking about digitization, digital twins, Internet of Things, but the fundamentals are always go back to the process that you are trying to achieve, whether it's building a house or a platform, and then the technology is an enabler that comes with it. But I think you're right, there are certainly generational differences. I read a fantastic report a week ago about recruitment into the water industry and sewage treatment. And they ran an advert that said, looking for maintenance technicians to manage the pumps and equipment, and you will be responsible for these pumps. And they got a lot of male applicants. And then they reran the advert that said, you'll be the custodian of the drinking water for the county, and you'll be nurturing, I exaggerate some of the words, and they got a far higher proportion of female applicants. And they hired a number of female technicians in who've gone on to be very successful. But it was about managing perception and what people thought of in a sewage plant. And so for the oil industry, we certainly face a transition as people are retiring, and recruiting coming in at the front end, much more technical savvy. But I had problems in the Netherlands with 40 offshore platforms. I was 16 people short in the operations team, couldn't encourage people to come in. It wasn't seen as sexy. It wasn't really necessary. You could get a good job. Why would you go away from home? And I wonder, in the construction industry, fairly migrant, moving around, you know, there's a lot of societal changes of what people want from a career and want from a job. So,
which is one of the reasons why, in the main, as an industry, we're pushing for modern methods of construction, with more and more to be done in the factory, cleaner, safer conditions. You know, youngsters not wanting to work on wet and windy sites anymore. That's a fact. So yeah, I mean, that's part of the move. The problem we have at the moment is that young people come into the industry, and I'm going to be rude now, so forgive me, everybody. But they either come in, they look at the culture that they have to deal with, and they turn around and disappear, or they become little SH1Ts themselves by copying what they see. Mm-hmm. And that's, you know, an unfortunate fact with behaviours. Not with everyone. I'm deliberately making a point.
Well, Paul is an expert on this.
So there is, Andrew, a slight macho culture is there within the industry still?
It's getting a lot better. We've run a lot of seminars over the last few weeks about diversity and ethnicity and quality and things like that during COVID, and I am seeing quite a marked improvement.
Well, I think Bruce will tell you that the oil and gas industry at 20 years ago or 30 years ago was a very macho industry.
It still is.
And the leadership behaviours were inappropriate, and they've changed completely.
I see a comment from Carol Hennigan. I wonder.
Yeah, bring Carol in. She's an expert in these areas.
Do you have to remember, we also got Paul, who had a question earlier on. We need to bring him in. So we've got about 6 or 7 minutes to go. So we'll try and do both.
I'm going to be quiet now. I've had too much airtime.
Hang on, I'm energized by your enthusiasm, Andrew. Made my day, and the shirt as well, by the way.
Whilst we're trying to figure that out, I was also...
On a Friday, I wear a loud shirt. It's become a tradition during lockdown, just to give people a bit of a smile. That's all.
Yeah. Made my day.
We had a fascinating statistic come out of BP, who use one of our systems globally. It's the competency management system. And it's something I've believed for many years, especially as a father of a son and a daughter. and that is that females generally underestimate their competency. And I believe that's also giving rise to the gender pay gap, in that the females tend to be less boisterous, less vociferous, less demanding, and do not lack the substance, capability, skills, knowledge, and experience. So there was a question along those lines about the messaging having to change. And I think one of the things that we, as the male part of the gender dynamic, really need to learn to listen and really need to acknowledge the benefits of the female gender. But it was wonderful for me to see evidence, tangible evidence of something I'd long believed.
What Peter's talking about is a competency assessment system where you self-attest and then your line manager says yes or no. And there was data came out from BP showing that for that group, there was a difference in perception and reality, and it was flipped on the basis of gender. So similar to the advert, but certainly, you know, it wasn't just a 1 or 2. It was statistically significant. So we've got to do something about it. We're going to have a comment from Carol.
Yes.
Yeah, Carol, please come in.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think all of these things are linked. I recently got involved in doing some collaboration around ISO 44001 and what have you. And one of the key things is actually a lot of self-assessment about how collaborative you are. And I think as an industry, we need to look at that more. And I absolutely agree with what Bruce just said about the confidence and competence. There is, sorry, it was Peter that said that. There is, and it's that whole bravado, that whole macho thing, there's that equal competence. And I think that's something that the industry needs to look at. And if we do embrace collaborative working a bit more looking at ourselves.
Yes, and if you
start to solve this.
and Carol, if you truly collaborate, you have to compromise, and compromise is not a bad word.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I many years ago started off in oil and gas industry, so it's interesting to hear how that's changed. But I think there's a certain amount of aggression in this industry, and compromise isn't allowed. And I think we do need to change that.
To collaborate, you have to compromise to collaborate, by definition.
Yeah. So is it contracts need to change? Do we need to embrace a different way of looking at things? And I think there's
you need it's a long conversation. You need a flexible commercial contract that enables people at the end of the contract to say how much do you put in, and therefore how much should we pay you, rather than fixed. If it's fixed at the beginning, that's a joint venture. It becomes confrontational immediately and legislative. If it's actually a very flexible contract, you have to have a flexible contract if you're collaborating.
Yeah, maybe things like more two-stage tender approaches, those sorts of things will actually start becoming the norm. That you know, you're getting the best out of everything. You also can start engaging the supply chain, because it's interesting around how many people thought leadership was not great. I think we're an industry made up of SMEs, so that's where you're going to get a vast mix of different things. So we do need to find some solution to actually allow this to flow through the supply chain, really. So
I think that's the biggest challenge for the industry. It's having something that's simple enough for the people at the grassroots, but then rises in complexity as we move through the engineering sphere, and then again simplifies for leadership feedback, and in sort of simple terms gives them the language that they need. I will just mention, I mentioned gender being used by BP. They were also analysing race, which, given Black Lives Matter and what's been happening recently, they analysed the data from that perspective, but they've not shared that with me, and I think that's because of the sensitivity of the moment.
I'm just going to ask if Paul's been sitting here very, very patient for about 20 minutes with this one. Would you like to come in, Paul? And we'll try and handle your question in the next 2 or 3 minutes, because we're coming to our hour. So over to you, Paul.
You're on mute, Paul.
Hi guys, thanks for a really interesting discussion there. I was quite happy to stand down and listen to it because it's been absolutely fantastic. I've worked with Andrew in the past on in a previous life, so I understand his passion towards collaborative working and the like. So yeah, again, obviously I come from the construction side, and it is a very macho industry, and sort of an industry that sort of says we can do it at a low cost and at a fast program. And this was generally driven by clients' expectations and either late decision making by them on when to press the button to go. And I think sometimes this is coming along and biting us on the backside. And then you're seeing, like this week, with the Kia figures presented at £440 million hole again, you know, and this is synonymous across our industry. It's not just Kia's. I'm just picking them as the most recent publishers. But, you know, again, when you look at is it because we've got so many component contractors involved that leads us to this, you know, or is it, and the oil and gas industry, you build a platform for the end user, you know, so it's designed specifically for you, and that makes it slightly different. I don't know. And then obviously program affects safety on site. You know, if you're too ambitious with program, leads to slips, trips and falls, and pushing people to the extremes, you know, and, you know, we're seeing the accident statistics are unfortunately going up at the moment in construction, so which is not a great thing. So just welcome.
I would completely agree with you, Andrew. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And so did Carol earlier on talking about SMEs. It's very difficult to get SMEs to behave in a uniform and repetitive manner because they're so busy just trying to get through the week. And what I would add to that is that my experience is that the simpler we make it, the more beneficial it is to the end user from the point of view of doing their own job, the more likely we are to get adoption, the more likely we are to break down some of these silos. And I think that's the key challenge. And if we can answer that challenge, and I've got some tools that I would hope would do that, but I don't know yet. I'm looking for opportunities to test it. And it's with that in particular in mind, because I think if we start with, if you can imagine, we've all got Excel spreadsheets, task lists coming out of our ears. I guarantee there is an enormous amount of replication across the industry of those things. If we were to data mine those, put them into a central silo and then distribute them such that everybody had a low-cost solution to this that was meaningful to doing the job, that would be a major step forward.
Okay, hopefully that's answered your question, Paul. We've gone over the hour now, so I think the thing to do is, Andrew, would you like to close it?
I would indeed, yes.
Thank you.
First of all, thanks to Howard and to John, as always, for hosting these webinars, which are proving really popular, very valuable. But also thanks to Peter, Paul and Bruce for giving of your valuable time. I've found the last 60 minutes most stimulating, and I hope those others that are listening in have too. So thank you to the three of you. And also thank you to those guests that came in and actively got involved in the discussions as the hour went on. Interestingly, the next couple of weeks, we're concentrating on smart construction. Next week, we've got Tuesday, Jim Mason and Duncan Reed looking at blockchain and smart contracts. And then on Friday, we've got Phil Thomas looking at how to start your digital transformation. So next week, Tuesday and Friday, very much about digital technologies and everything surrounding it. And then the following week, we're actually concentrating on off-site technologies. We've got Dan Macy from Holistic Housing Solutions, who's an expert in off-site construction, talking to us on Tuesday, and that's regarding the supply chain involvement. And then on Friday week, 2 weeks today, I'm very excited to say that Welsh Government have agreed to come in and speak. Welsh Government have got a specific campaign and policy on modern methods of construction, and they're going to share that with us. And that should be really good, because earlier this morning, I was in a Welsh Government webinar on this topic as well as other things. So Welsh Government have got lots to say to us in 2 weeks' time. So with that, without further ado, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Have a fabulous weekend, and hope to see you all again on Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That's an interesting thing for Mike Watson to find out. But
he sent a great big email for
what's that?
obviously, I was just reading it as you said, Jim. It's all revolving around